I believe this is a poster form. This is a flyer copy, which I received, which I don't even remember seeing, from 1967 from Grandy Ballroom. The band I was in here was the Belshires. DF is Don Forsyth. On the bottom, I had to look it up, and that was my friend Don Forsyth, who then was a poster and graphic artist known as Donnie Dope. Well, as you can imagine, there are things that I'm not sure about with some of these things. The Black and Blues Band playing, I have the earlier one I know we played that was a flyer that you've probably already seen. This one was actually later because there was a poster, and it might have been on my birthday, just 22nd, I don't know. But Thursday, Friday, I don't know. I think we're listed on Saturday or something anyway, but I know that John Angelo replaced me in this Black and Blues Band without telling me, and I went there to see him, and I saw a different guitar player playing, the Larry Carsman, who I knew, but I think this was that gig, but I could have played both of them. I'm not exactly positive, but I wanted to put it up here no matter what. I remember this because it was a particularly good gig, because we had always had a lot of fun with playing with our bros, C5 the up, if you could say that, and Pink Beach Mob underneath, because it was done at Wayne State at a theater type setting, which is more like a little auditorium, but it was real nice there, and a lot of people came to it, and it was a great gig, so I thought it was worth mentioning all this about it. This one's one of our well-known ones, and the reason it's well-known is not so much for us playing there, although it should be, I think. Anyway, because Gary Grimshaw was one of his earlier posters, although he did earlier ones than this, of course. But this is Pink Peach Mob. You'll see us just below the MC5 playing with Janis Joplin, whose band was a big brother of the holding company then, in 1968. When I think about this, it's pretty heartwarming because uh, the guys in these bands that were our friends decided they would try and help us because all our equipment got ripped off and the record deal and everything went down the can. So, in the end, we didn't get anything and we didn't raise very much money for having this benefit, but it's nice to see that people cared, and, it was a good, fun gig anyway. Yes, I'm thinking about this particular thing. Uh, these things that happened on Sunday at the Grandy were shows, but they were kind of loosely run, well, which was kind of cool for people that like to, kind of bop in there on a Sunday and not expect everything to be a show, run at exactly a certain time and, like it was on the weekends. So the Sunday things were generally looser, and a lot of your friends come down there and just have a pretty good time. And I guess that's why they call it the Tribal Stomp. I remember this, it was 1969, which I neglected to mention the first time, in Petoskey and up north in the summer in those days. This is one of the biggest gigs I ever played as far as the attendance of people. It was gigantic, thousands of people. Anyway, we played Dutch Elm, either first or second. Most everybody on the bill played, but I was looking forward to Muddy Waters and he wasn't there. But all in all, great gig. This is Dave Miller's wedding at the Grandy. My band Richmond played there. I remember there was a few other bands, but of course, it was a big, gigantic party. So the first part of this is going to show what Dave sent me was the front of it. I believe it was on the back, but there'll be a second short thing of this, and it'll say the band names, and just thought I should include it. This is one of the Free John Sinclair things we did. I think there was more than one. This one, 1969, taking place at the Grandy Ballroom. My band Richmond, which was Dutch Elm, basically the same band with a different name, which happened a lot as the times went on in those times. So you could see the schedule, and the rest of it speaks for itself. This is like an alternate poster. All some of the other ones that were made for Free John Sinclair that happened at the Grandy. Our band Richmond played on this. It's a little piece of history from 1969 that you can sure tell by the people that are on the poster. Once again, 1969, towards the end in the summer, this was a really big gig Russ Gibb put on. The poster was done by, once again, the famous graphic artist Gary Grimshaw. My band was Dutch Elm, which opened the show, and what I remember especially about it was getting to see a lot of the other artists that I had never seen before or since. This poster is from 1969. As you can see, I wrote on it just to make sure. Richmond was our band, Dutch Elm, what it morphed into, which later morphed into Mighty Quick. But this is done at the Borderline Club in Monroe, which was a huge roller rink. Later became the Full Tilt Boogie Ballroom. As you can see with Iggy and the Stooges show. This is the first recorded gig that I know in the 1970s, and I didn't even realize that Richmond, our band, was still called that. Later you'll see it morphed into Mighty Quick pretty soon. But with Brownsville Station, and can't say who did the poster. I'm listing as a poster, which I think it was, but it could be a flyer. A lot of times you don't know. That's the best I could do. I don't remember much about this gig. This one I remember was interesting because it's one of our first trips to play in Windsor. The year would be 1970. People will recognize probably a lot of these local bands, especially if you're around in those times. I don't remember it being a super remarkable gig, but I remember that it was well attended and everybody played good. This is from 1972 at the Yak Arena in Wyandotte, which is a fairly big arena, and it was a big full show. What I don't have is the band Scott, which is I think Derek St. Holmes, which was I think probably billed ahead of us. I'm not sure. Windfall was the opening act, and then we played. It was a very successful gig that just shows what happened around those times. This gig was great because there was only 2 bands on it a day. As you can see, the Thursday performance, Flack was my band. We were there, and Fort Auditorium was a great venue to play. It sounded good, it looked good, the place was full of people, and there was just us and Steve Miller. So it was, I guess, remarkable because of that. It was 1972. This is from 1974, I believe. Rodney Bingenheimer's was a famous place, you could say, on Sunset Strip in Hollywood, where we played a show there with Iggy Pop, with my band Flack, which I have some pictures of also. Well, a guy like me born in Detroit should play in Detroit, and at the Trouble Theater, it was in Detroit. This is early 90s, I believe, unless there's a date on it that says otherwise. This says the date, not the year. So this was basically a Blue Monday performance on an actual stage at a theater. This, I believe, is in 2007. Joe LeBeau production, you could say, because it's in Plymouth, his hometown. The old Village Classic Car Show under a tent with a bunch of people. Rockabilly tribute, Danny Cash, who did Johnny Cash songs, I remember that. And we also played some blues there that day. This was done in the summer, of course, June 23rd, 2007. The date's right on it. The remarkable thing about this was in Caseville on the beach, which is a nice setting. Yeah, not a huge crowd, but good enough to have a good time. And this is the first gig where I met the guitarist Matt Bessie. This is one of those gigs where I was guesting with Wile E. Coyote, which we did quite a bit of. This downriver cruise was basically, cars as usual, and you would think. So it was an outdoor gig, and it was fun. Okay, this is another benefit that I'm kind of proud of for Dr. Craig Oster, who was battling ALS with his own treatments. And he's been fairly successful about doing it. So we're happy to have played a little part in having some different, benefits to help finance the thing. And you can see, some of the guys that put this on. New Brick Road, that American Legion post, I believe, is Livonia. The year, I'm not sure. Well, there it's on there, 2008. This is kind of a feel-good thing for me. Uh, Poster later days done by Carl Lundgren, who, of course, you could see did some of the originals for the Grandy Ballroom. But it's especially kind of feel good for me because it's nice to have your band, which in my case was the Pink Beach Mob, listed with all the well-known bands of the day. This was done quite a few years ago as a reissue sort of thing, reissue Downriver Flashback, like it says, which was run by the Lundgrens, Michelle and Carl, my friends. So this is took place in Wyandotte. It was an outdoor gig, and the rest of it kind of explains it on the poster. This one is another benefit for my friend Stanley Zilfro, who is known as Stanley T. Mad Hatter, or just Stanley. A picture of him was, I believe, from the Jay Giles show that he did as an announcer, which one of the biggest shows he did because he liked to announce bands. So we had to have something for him since he passed away. So this was a good show, well attended by a lot of his friends. This is a bit different. I was playing in Ocala, Florida a few years back. I see this poster on the wall I'd never seen before with my name on it. I asked what was going on, and one of the guys I was playing with tells me, oh, tomorrow night we're playing at the Ocala Blues Festival. So this was from Ocala Blues Festival, which I like going down south anyway, so this was a fun time. This was another gig put on by my friends, the Lundgrens, poster done by Carl Lundgren. Mario's was an Italian restaurant, and you might figure that. And we were the only band playing that night. It was just a sort of a showcase for us. And, something different for a place that didn't have blues very often. This was a benefit concert for WHFR, the radio station, at Henry Ford Community College in Dearborn. One of the last radio benefits I did for my old friend Joanne Korchenska, who sadly passed away not too long after this. So it was a good thing, raise some money, and it was supposed to do. This was a little different, I think, because there were bikes at this show, but the car and the bike show and those kind of things in Plymouth seemed to be popular and went pretty well, so we kept doing them as long as we were wanted. I would call this a poster sign, I guess. From the Arts Beats and Eats Festival. It happens every year around Labor Day, around 2017, I believe this is. So it just shows what they put out there every year when you were playing it the many years that we did it. I think this is the first of the holiday party jam sessions that we did with our old friend Dennis Lauren doing the poster art for it, which is basically a get together and jam session of several of us musicians that are left from the 60s that used to jam all the time at parties together, and wanted to see how it would come out still doing it. Another show in the mid-2000s. This was run by my friends Michelle and Carl Lundgren. The theme here was to capture some of the people, if they could, from the 1969 rock and roll revival, so they called it Woodstock in the D, all these years later, which was a good show and had a lot of memories and people that you haven't seen in a long time, both performers and patrons. Seems like my old friend Dennis Lauren can't stop doing posters even for parties and jam sessions, which this was, of some of our old friends that are still left from the times of the 60s. Basically, from the Dearborn area. So it's a collage of some different posters and different gigs from some of our friends, and we decided to record it on a poster for posterity. This was done last year, is the most recent of the holiday party and reunions. We decided to cut out the jam session part of it because we ended up playing and nobody's socializing. So this has just gone back to socializing, and once again, poster done by Dennis Lauren. Wanted to make sure I mentioned here that these two posters were put together by Doug Smith, because people like to know who did them. I believe, this first picture was taken by Joe LeBeau. The second one, I believe, by Doug Smith at a different gig. This is one of the very earliest flyers of the Grandee. I believe it was November 26th was 1 month or so basically after it opened. I was in the Black and Blues band here. We played with the MC5, and I was told that Rob Tyner was the one that did this flyer. Here's an early Grandee flyer before the posters, at which I was in the Belshire, so this would be in 1967. I'm not sure the date, if it even says it on there, not that I remember, but anyway, this is just to show you how things started. Early Pink Beach Mob band card. Colin, who was Colin Kendall, was our manager at that time. I believe that's her phone number on the inside. But we thought it was a unique band card to have a Pink Beach Mob one that actually opened up, which people did find interesting since most people just had flat band cards then. Well, the Birmingham Palladium, lots of great shows. I wish I could find more of the posters and some more of the things we did there. Uh, but at least this one, whether it's a flyer or poster, really doesn't matter. With the Alice Cooper show, when Alice Cooper was a brand new band in town and, just getting going. And, as usual, we played before they did, but I remember being well attended and everybody liking it. Around 1972, John Sinclair opened what was called the People's Ballroom in Ann Arbor. I wasn't living here then, living in the Detroit area like most of the time, but anyway, we played with Detroit, which was Mitch Ryder's band minus Mitch Ryder. I think Rusty Day was singing lead for the band at that time. So it was a good gig, pretty well attended, and Ballroom didn't last long, but while it did, it was great. This book was done by myself and Dennis Warren, who is now a famous poster person, and he was working on that then. So he was the artistic person behind this songbook, which was of my original songs, mainly from a period of the late 60s to the early 70s. This was 1973. It was some of our little ventures into Windsor, which at that time had lowered the drinking age, and it was a big place to play for any American band. So the ballroom was set up for this, and Flack was our band. 1972, basically. This is from Lincoln Park Theater, which is very interesting, especially because they got theater spelled wrong on the thing. But this is a show from 1973 at the Lincoln Park Theater. Joe Blow Jr. from our Crumb fame, if you know who he was as far as his comics and stuff, was the kind of poster model for this. This is from 1974 also, Hollywood, California, where we played a gig on Jazz Steps, which was on UCLA, famous university in Los Angeles when we were living there. The interesting part of this is myself on the left, Greg Denning on the right playing bass, and in the middle was a stand-in because we were changing drummers at the time due to our main drummer coming back to Detroit to live. So this guy Greg Ornelas, that was a neighbor of ours, filled in for the picture. This was my first blues band proper, if you could say that, from 1979 basically started. Union Street was in Grosse Pointe. Was a little small club, but they had a little blues circuit of about 4 different clubs that we rotated around. So this is just one of the flyers that we used for the West Side Blues Band. Actually, this started a little earlier than 1988 or 9, but it was around that time. The Attic Bar would hire us, and I used that to put together a band. Notice the big glasses I used. That's how I remember the dates of things. but this is very early on Marc Falconberry Blues Band starting. This is one of the things that we used to call Blues Jubilee, which was Blind Pig in Ann Arbor, which is a fairly famous place here. You can see the date, 1989. It was, a multi-band show with some of the blues guys that were around at that time. This is different because every Monday, famous coachman who was a radio personality, which most Detroit blues guys at least will remember, used to play CDs and records and everything. And in between, we were the famous coachman's blues band. I was in it with Wesley Smith and Don Waddy. I think maybe George Heritier or somebody was playing harmonica with us. And this particular night, we were backing up Mr. Bow and also doing our own thing. When in '83, I was starting out playing some solo gigs as well as other things, but this was in California. So this particular gig was in Reseda, California, playing on a gig with Johnny Winter, or it was me and him in a band, and that's it. So I just thought I'd explain it. I'd like to include this to show that we did play at some smaller places. The Stone House in Detroit was actually a house. So it was a pretty intimate gig that you could play, and you couldn't have if you had a big crowd, it was like 30 people because that's about all you could fit in there. But it was an interesting kind of venue for blues, kind of like you might have seen in the 1920s. Well, we decided that this is going to run a little bit long in the sense that there's these 4 or 5 flyers in a row, so I don't have to comment on each one of them, but generally say that they explain themselves, and you can read it if you like. This is one of the gigs I'm particularly proud of because it's a benefit for the Children's Home of Detroit, which we did at several places. Moby Dick's later, it was a little bigger, but at this time in 1990, it was done at Cisco's, which was the other end lounge at that time in Taylor. Funny we mentioned Flint on the last one because this was Rube's, which for some reason we did really well at in Flint. I wish I had a CD out or something at this time because I could have probably sold a lot of them. We played there once a month for probably a couple of years at Rube's there in Flint, starting in the early 90s. Another early on, one of the other end lounge before it became Cisco's, you'll just see a small sample of some of the people that were playing in there. All became very well-known local musicians for sure. This was notable because it was early 90s. The other end lounge became Cisco's later, but while it was still the other end, they decided to have some blues there so you could see who was playing. This was Churchill's in Flint. It was a spin-off in a sense because this brother that ran this place was the brother of the guy that ran Rube's, which was Dave Donahue. So we also played downtown Flint at Churchill's, which was a kind of glass and chrome sort of yuppie place. This is a later example of a history of the Attic Bar. After a few years after this, I think it was totally gone from having blues and stuff. But I had already put together a band and been playing for a while, and then we would still come back and play at the Attic along with other artists that we enjoyed working with. The fire hall here in London, Ontario was a fun thing to do because we had to host a jam session on Saturday afternoon, and it was just as packed as a gig, and we got to hear a lot of Canadian musicians. I believe we played there 3 days all together, counting the jam session, and it was a lot of fun, and it was worth putting in here. This is 93. This is very early on Moby Dick's. You can see a lot of the bands. The Eureka Blue Moons, I don't even remember them. I probably never saw them, but on the Blues Jubilee on Saturday, I was part of that with Little Junior Kennedy and a lot of different blues guys that were
around at the time. And so all these shows were very well attended and, all went well.
Occasionally, Blues Factory, our booking agency, would book us in halls as well as bars and clubs and stuff like this. So it was interesting because, a hall is full of people that don't know what you're going to do, or a lot of them nothing about blues. So I guess I got to read the text, which they put there, which I hardly ever read except right now. But it was a fun gig, and nice to be in a hall in a different situation, teaching people or trying to about the blues.
Jimmy G's was a place in Fenton that we played, a club. We also had a blues festival there outside. One thing I remember notable about this was a guy that ran it said he didn't even like the blues, but his son was sick, and because we had blues and it was doing well there, he was able to help pay for some medications or operations or whatever it was for his son. So in the end, I think he ended up liking us at least for that. This was done at Cisco's, one of the few blues jams I did for Blues Society, which was basically one of their meetings that we played. You know, so you will see, John Watkins, and I played acoustically separate from him on that day. We're thinking now this is around 1994. Interesting thing about this Blues Jubilee is Moby Dick's, which was one of the bigger rooms that was always very well attended by all blues fans and even people that weren't. And one of the attractions there was the Battle of the Blues Harmonicas, where you had like 5 or 6 guys blowing harp at the same time. And just very interesting. And I was glad to be able to play part of this.
Union Street Station was a bar, club, restaurant in the lower peninsula of Michigan, but the northern part of it. So it was nice to be able to bring the sound of Detroit blues up to an out of town venue like this. Typical in 1996, schedule at the famous Soup Kitchen, where people came from far and wide and normally regarded it as a home of the blues for people from here and others places.
This one is notable because the lounge was adjacent to Metro Airport, which I thought was interesting because there were people there, from different parts of the world. So it was a small club, and it was interesting mainly because of what I just mentioned.
Well, for most serious blues fans, the Attic Bar was a place to go, well, which was a old place that you would think of in the 1920s, so it was perfect for a blues bar down in Hamtramck. And this is just their general schedule, what was going on at the time. The Capitol Station was an old railway station that they turned into a little club, which was pretty neat in Lansing. So this was a different kind of situation because people had to know to go there, and interesting the way they spelled my name on this.
This explains a little bit about Michigan Taste Fest because it does say the date and it does say Detroit News Center, which, people know where that is by, GM and all that down there. What it doesn't say on this was the headliner was Buddy Guy, so we'd be on one stage and we'd do our set, and then the other stage, Buddy Guy would do his set, and people would, vacillate in between the two. I think this is 96 or 97, I'm not sure, when before Cisco's was born, it was the other end, and this just shows some of the artists that were around at that time. This is multi-band thing you could say on one sheet of paper because playing a lot of different clubs, it just shows you which ones were around. The old Woodward Grill, I think it was Birmingham. Attic Bar, basically Hamtramck, Coyote Club, Pontiac, and Memphis Smoker, Royal Oak.
Once upon a time, like a lot of people you like to say, this Blues Review newspaper went around, and it was, the Oasters who did it, but mainly there was no other paper associated with blues at that time. And so they would do reviews on any local CD that came out that you submitted. And so, it's nice of them to give me a good review on mine.
This is done at Blue Goose Inn, one of the acoustic performances. You'll see my name on there for Thursday performance, which was acoustically done. So I wanted to show that I also did those kind of gigs at the Blue Goose Inn in the mid-90s or so. This is Michigan Taste Fest, or called Taste of Detroit, which happened in a New Center area around 2001. We're nearest we can figure, multi-band show.
But we were asked to play at the Southfield Library. It was interesting. That's why I put it on here as promo, because it was a blues and jazz series done at the library, which is interesting because you hardly ever see concerts put on at a library like this. But it was a nice thing when you could have a small audience that was really there just for the music. On this day, we were asked to do a benefit for a young kid that needed a brain operation. We were able to raise enough money at this benefit and auction to pay for his parents' expenses, which were not covered, in order to go out of state to have the operation. And it was a success, and I'm very proud of being a part of that. So that's the reason I'm even saying a voiceover for this particular thing.
This one was a benefit for Robin, who was the wife of Clay St. James, who played harmonica with us while he was in my band for 5 years. She passed away from Lou Gehrig's disease. Joe LeBeau was one of the instrumental people, along with Jim Price and Shirley Franklin, etc., to organize a benefit at the Lowertown Grill, late 90s, I guess this would be, for a benefit for Robin. This is a retro show, and that's the appeal to it, I suppose. Since I'm the only one left of my band to play, it was held, I believe, Tenney Street Roadhouse in Dearborn, it says on the flyer. And basically I played with Stoney and the West Siders, which he was Stoney Mason from the Jagged Edge. I believe this is 2006. Fishbones is located in Greektown, which was a very kind of a special place to play. You had people as a cut through to the casino, and also Fishbones is a fairly big place, kind of well-known restaurant. So this shows the artists that were there at the time. I think this was in Royal Oak, Arts Beats and Needs of 2006. I'm not sure if it was before or after they moved from Pontiac, but it does show the artists that were around at those times. This is really good in a sense because it shows 3 local bands that were playing at this event. We're on the river, which was a big festival on the river where they had boat races on the Detroit River in Trenton. Interesting about it is because we were able to sell tickets for this, and plenty of people came. This is an early Arts Beats and Eats performance, but it's not so early that it was in Pontiac. I'll look and see if I have one of those. This was after it moved to Royal Oak around 2010. So I just thought I'd mention that I played every one of them up until a couple years ago. So I did 23 years since it started in a row.
I guess Hannon House was part of the community on Woodward Street in Detroit. So I still do things down in that area occasionally. And my old friends Lundgrens called me up and asked me if I wanted to do one more, which was played by myself during Noel night, which is it's horse-drawn carriages and things of Christmas nature. That happens every year.
Steve Sanchez, that ran Blues Factory for all those years and booked it, decided to give me a call and these other guys about playing a benefit for Yard Dog Johnny, because he was one of the great Detroit artists who had moved away when the blues thing kind of went down in the 2000s. As you could see, it's 2015. So we got together at a place that would let us have it, Norris Field of Dreams, which you'll see on the poster. And everybody showed up on this poster to play.
I wanted to include this as part of a promotional outlet here because Doug Smith, I thought, did such a good job of putting this promo thing together, because the pictures are cool. He did it on 2 sides of something. The text is a little different, and I thought it was unique enough to be included in this. As it says on the top of this, a notable performance, I did a couple of these things that I don't have promo for or flyers or anything. In '69, we played with Wilbur Harrison, who wrote the big hit game at Kansas City with Dutch Elm Richmond at Birmingham Palladium. Also around that same time, not on this list, we played there with Nice, which was Keith Emerson's band with two different guys before Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And mighty quick, we opened for Savoy Brown and Rod Stewart. And the Faces, which is, I have some pictures, but no promo. The last thing, probably from '72, would be playing in a band with Bob Babbitt, which was a thing I only did for one night. But it was nice to him say that he thought I was good, because he was one of the guys that I thought I could never be anything like him when I first heard him. And I think everybody else felt the same way when they heard him on those Motown records, where I was able to sit in the studio and watch him record, not at Motown, but at another studio, and try to learn from that. So I thought these things were definitely worth mentioning, and, for people that might be interested in some of the other things that I did. These were pictures taken from the featured article in Cream magazine at the East Town Ballroom in 1970, where the band Mighty Quick, where we opened for Rod Stewart and the Faces and Savoy Brown. Pictured in this is myself on the left playing guitar, John Angelos in the center singing, behind him Michael Jones playing bass, and not pictured are son Roy Fernandez playing guitar and Tom Dillon playing drums. I'm sure a lot of people don't know, but my old friend Stanley Zillafro, who's known as Stanley the Mad Hatter, the late Stanley the Mad Hatter, moonlighted other things, and one of the things he did was write articles for the Dearborn Heights Leader, the local paper. So just before we were going to play at Ford Auditorium, he kind of surprised me by putting an article in about us playing there with Steve Miller, and a lot of the quotes in there are kind of his more than mine, but it was an interesting article that I don't have many like it.
I would say this is important because this was from the Los Angeles Times when I was living out there, and was treasurer of the Southern California Blues Society, which was of note because I never played. They didn't know much about me playing, but I had experience setting up the stage and doing treasury type things. So this is to show that. You will see me on the upper right corner, and just below me in the lower right corner was my second wife, Claudia.
When I look at this, I remember when we first went to Rube's to play, which was in Flint. I think the Alligators in this particular version went first, and then I think I might have played there with might be on the second week. But later on, after we established ourselves with this, then I wrote songs for this particular unit of the band, and also played in the band for about a year. Just below this article will be the Lifetime Achievement Award, which is presented to me, as well as these members of this band, basically for being in the band and writing songs for them. This review is from Big City Blues magazine, based here in Detroit, by Joanne Korchenska did the review, my friend from WHFR radio fame. The prelude to playing for us in Lansing was for me to do a phone interview for Lansing State Journal, which you see here. On this day, the Detroit News decided they wanted to do an article on blues clubs, specifically Cisco's. So we happened to be playing there that day. So myself on the left, James Cloyd, Vinny behind him, Carl Caballero on harmonicas, and this is how it came out. This was taken at the Sports of 50s place, bar, club in Wyandotte. Joe LeBeau had an idea that there was an old Cool Flames band or something that he was in or involved with that wasn't using a name anymore. So he decided to adopt it so we would have something to do during the week if we wanted to go out and play, and not have to use names of ourselves or our old bands or our own bands. So we put this together, and it was a little more than a jam. It was organized, each of our talents, and people seemed to like it. I think this picture was put in the Detroit News as a review.
Now, this, I believe, is from the Metro Times, early 2000s, for the Christmas CD, which is basically Anton James and I play guitar on it, and then the B-side is me doing a slide song, Christmas songs, basically. And the CD didn't even come out till after Christmas, but this was a review of it.
This article was done by the Capitol Blues Society from Lansing, who happened to come to the gig that we had with the paper that's been represented before, and it's just a general article, which most of it is accurate. I mean, not all of it, but I thought I should put it with it because, it's someone else's from the Blues Society's impression of the gig. A little different looking was this particular gig because it was done at a guy's, converted body shop garage, but it was cool because he set it up at night as a blues club, which is interesting out in Napoleon, which is a very small town. And, most people in town would come to it. And it was nice to have, a thing you don't know what it's going to be with Full House. So we went there, and Phil Risky played keyboards and harmonicas. Wesley Smith's pictured on bass. Bob Lee on drums. You don't see much of pictures, so I thought I'd say who was there. And also my old friend James Coyd, who came there and sat in with us. Maybe he was going to play there. I don't know how he ended up being way out there because that's quite a distance from Detroit. But, it was a good one, and I'm glad I got a record of it.
Okay, this is important because it's a Blues Notes magazine. Came from Detroit Blues Society. They had a March meeting at the 4th Street Bar and Grill, or whatever it was called, I don't know, at 4th Street Brewery. There it is. The dates are on it. With my good friend Waylon Dale, who organized the blues part of this, musically speaking, so we played together at their meeting, which happened to fall on the same day. This one expands a little on the previous poster, which was from 4th Street Brewery, Detroit Blues Society meeting. Just has a little more information on myself.
This one is an article from the previous poster, Dearborn for the benefit for WHFR, the radio station, and Dearborn, which was one of the few ones that were had a blues theme. It was interesting because we were able to get together with people that we don't usually see. Charles Buddy Smith, and I don't know how many gigs that we played together, maybe more than I remember, but not that many. And so it was nice to, be able to sit in with some of these different people and also, to do our little thing and then do everything for a good cause at the same time. The article was written about upcoming performance at Southfield Library. So this is that article. And later things will be explained later. I had gotten contacted by Don McGee, the photographer, who, and I believe he may still be doing this, was putting on shows for blues at Southfield Library, which is sort of an intimate gathering, which was, those things are always cool because, they're not dependent on making money or anything necessarily. They just want to, provide a fair show for a fair price for people, and they benefit the library. So this day was myself, Wesley Smith on bass, Joe LeBeau on horns, saxophones, and John Johnson on drums.
This is a general biography I used because I found out I have a cousin in Nashville, Ron Falconberry, and he likes genealogy and stuff, so I wrote a special bio basically for a family website